Most people will never travel the world as much as they want to. Not because they can't afford flights, not because they don't have the time, but because they're protecting something that's quietly holding them back. Their home. The one place they feel in control is the exact thing that is limiting how free they can be. Because the moment you suggest letting a complete stranger living in that space, sleeping in your bed, use your kitchen, and walk through your life, something in the mind immediately reacts. And it doesn't just whisper, it says absolutely not. And that reaction feels logical, responsible, even intelligent. But what most people don't realize is that that thought, that immediate rejection, is not always based on risk. It's based on perception. And that perception is often completely wrong. Because while most people are rejecting the idea without even trying it, there's another group of people quietly living in a completely different reality. They're traveling the world, staying in homes in countries they once thought were out of reach, paying nothing for accommodation, and doing it again and again and again, all by letting strangers stay in their home. Chapter 1, the decision that started it all. This isn't a theory, this isn't a trend, this is something that's already happened 26 times now. And the strangest part is how it all started. Not with confidence, not with certainty, but with a decision that at the time wasn't even agreed upon. Because the truth is, I created the listing on Home Exchange before I even spoke to my wife about it. Photos were uploaded, descriptions were written, availability was set. Our home was now live on the Home Exchange platform without even a full conversation. She wasn't with me at the time, but when I sent her the link, the reaction was immediate. She said, "There is no way in hell we're doing that." Now, I wasn't surprised in her reaction because I'm a bit more of a risk taker than she is. But she had no hesitation. She wasn't curious. She just said, absolutely not. Chapter 2, Fear, Control, and the Meaning of Home. And in that moment, something became very clear to me. The resistance wasn't about the platform. It wasn't about the people. It was about what the home represents. Control. Because a home is not just walls and furniture. It's routine, identity, safety, predictability. It's one of the few places where everything feels known. And the idea of giving that space to a stranger doesn't just feel risky. It feels like losing control of something deeply personal. So the mind does what it's designed to do. It protects. It starts listing every possible negative outcome. What if they steal stuff? What if they wreck stuff? What if something goes wrong and we're not there? These thoughts feel rational, necessary, and responsible. But what's interesting is that these same people will walk into hotels without a second thought. They'll sleep in beds used by hundreds of strangers. They'll trust systems they don't understand. They'll hand over money and assume everything will be fine. And the difference is not risk, it's familiarity. Familiar risks feel safe, but unfamiliar ones, they just feel dangerous. Even when the reality is often the opposite. Chapter 3, the first crack in the fear. So the challenge was never to eliminate fear, it was to question it. So instead of trying to convince my wife with logic alone, I changed approach. I said, how about we just experiment here? I didn't say we're going to do this forever. I said, how about we try it just once? And that small shift, that matters more than it seems. Because the brain resists permanent change, but it tolerates temporary discomfort. And once the idea becomes temporary, something opens up. Curiosity. Questions replace assumptions. How does it actually work? Who are the people doing this? What protections are in place? And slowly, the unknown becomes a little bit less scary. Still uncomfortable, but bearable. And eventually, the decision is made. Not because the fear disappears, but because curiosity becomes stronger than the fear. Chapter 4, the first exchange changes everything. Because the first exchange doesn't just test the system, it tests the belief. There is a moment before it happens where the mind is still preparing for something to go wrong. You imagine all the scenarios, you double check everything, and you feel slightly on edge. And then nothing happens. The home is respected, communication is easy, and everything works as it was supposed to. And the brain, which had built an entire narrative around risk, is forced to rethink because belief doesn't change through information. It changes through experience. That first experience doesn't remove fear completely, but it definitely weakens it. And more importantly, it introduces a new possibility. Maybe this works. Chapter 5, repetition, rewires, and reality. So you do it again and again and again. And over time, something subtle but powerful happens. That thing that once felt extreme becomes normal. And after a few exchanges, you start to notice patterns. People are respectful. They treat your home with care. They communicate clearly. They're not just random strangers, the way the mind first imagined. They are people doing the exact same thing you are. They are trying to travel differently. They're just trying to experience more without being restricted by the cost of accommodation. And that realization shifts everything. Because now, instead of focusing on what could go wrong, you start seeing what's possible. Trips become easier to justify. Spontaneous travel becomes more realistic. Destinations that once felt expensive are now accessible. Chapter 6, the lifestyle shift and compounding freedom. And over time, the impact compounds in a way that's hard to fully understand until you experience it. More than 26 exchanges later, the results are undeniable. Many countries visited, many experiences had, and lots of money saved. But beyond all of that, something deeper has changed. The way decisions are made. Because what started as a single, uncomfortable experiment has turned into a completely different way of how we travel. And this is where the real difference between people becomes clear. Not in income, not in intelligence, but how they interpret risk. Most people overestimate the risk of doing unfamiliar things and underestimate the cost of staying the same. They protect what they have, but never question what that protection is costing them. Chapter 7, the hidden cost of saying no. Because saying no to something like home exchange doesn't just avoid potential problems, it also avoids potential outcomes. The trips that never happen, the places never seen, and the experiences never had. And this is where the psychology becomes really important, because the brain is wired to prioritize loss over gain. It fears losing what it already has, more than it values what it could gain. So the idea of someone possibly damaging your home feels more significant than the reality of being able to travel the world for free, even if the probability of damage is low and the benefits are high. This is known in behavioural research as loss aversion, and it quietly shapes decisions every day. But the people who embrace home exchange have learned to see this differently. We don't ignore the risk, we contextualise it. We look at the systems, the reviews, the communication, the patterns. We understand that most people on the platform are not trying to cause any problems. They are simply looking for the same thing we are, a better way to live. And once that perspective is adopted, control returns, not by eliminating uncertainty, but understanding it. Chapter 8, the decision that changed our life. Because true control is not about avoiding all risk, it's about navigating it with clarity. And that clarity changes behaviour. You become more open and willing to test new ideas, and more aware of the difference between perceived danger and actual danger. And over time, this mindset extends beyond travel. It affects how you approach opportunities, how you evaluate decisions, how you respond to discomfort. Because once you realise something you feared actually improves your life, it forces you to question what else might be true. And that's where the transformation really happens. Not in the places you go, but in how you think. Because after enough experiences, that original reaction, that immediate no, starts to sound unfamiliar. Not because it was wrong, but because it was incomplete. It was based on a version of reality that had never been tested. And once tested, it changed. You don't wait for the perfect time. You create your own opportunities. And the home, the thing that we once thought we had to protect at all costs, becomes the exact thing that enables it. Not a limitation, a leverage point. And that shift is difficult to explain to someone that has never experienced it. Because from the outside, it still looks risky. It's still uncomfortable and still triggers the same initial reaction. But on the inside, it feels normal. It feels structured. It feels controlled in a different way. Because now, instead of fearing strangers, you understand them. Not individually, but collectively. You understand the system, the patterns, the behaviour. And that understanding replaces fear with something far more useful. Confidence. Not blind confidence, not reckless trust, but informed, tested confidence. The kind that only comes from doing something enough times to see what's real and what isn't. And maybe that's the most important part of all of this. Because the real value of letting over 30 strangers stay in our home, it's not just the free accommodation, it's not just the travel, and it's not just the experiences. It's the realisation that the limits that most people put on themselves are self-imposed, quietly reinforced by assumptions that feel true, but that have never truly been challenged. And once one of those assumptions breaks, it becomes very hard to ignore the others, because you start to see a pattern. How many decisions are made based on fear rather than evidence? How many opportunities are dismissed without even being explored? How many no's are automatic rather than intentional? And in that awareness, something shifts. Not dramatically, not all at once, but enough to change direction. Because at the center of all this is still that same moment. That quiet decision, the one that most people never notice. The one where something new appears and the mind decides what to do with it. Reject it or explore it. And the difference between those two choices is often the difference between a life that stays predictable and one that quietly expands in ways that never originally thought was possible. Thanks for watching, and if you'd like to see the video where we go across England and Ireland for 50 nights, saving over $20,000 in free accommodation, check it out here.